edition of Green Rush Live is supported by Cannabis Resources, helping you grow with Cannabis funding. Check them out at cannabisresources.com.
Well, it's Friday, and there's never a dull Friday in the existence of the cannabis universe and in pro-cannabis media. Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy Young, the host of Green Rush Live and also the founder of Pro-Cannabis Media. And we have a very interesting breaking news situation going on here in the cannabis business world. And every third Friday, we happen to have Morgan Fox from Normal joining us, and we have him again today. But I'm also going to be joined by my almost regular co-host, guest host, Josh Kincaid. Josh, how you doing today?
Good, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on again.
No. Happy you're here. And Morgan, I'm guessing you know what we're going to talk about. Do you know what we're going to talk about, Morgan?
I'm actually not exactly sure if it's breaking because I've been on the road since 7 a.m.
Okay, but you knew about the main case and the case of them challenging resident in Maine. And anyway, the federal court ruled on this. Now, did you know that?
I did.
Okay.
I'm still diving into exactly what that means nationally, as well as what that means for the jurisdiction of that particular circuit. But it's definitely very interesting to see the Dormant Commerce Clause being applied in such a fashion. Yep.
And that's exactly right. And you know, it's funny. It was a few months ago. We had the law professor from Vanderbilt on, Robert Michos, and he explained how that works and why he thinks it is in place and why, and this pretty much clears the way for interstate commerce in cannabis. And I mean, rather than reading the entire article from Marijuana Moment and Tom Angel, and we all know him, it was basically a 2-1 decision by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit that affirmed that interpretation, which is broadly meant to prevent states from enforcing laws that unduly restrict interstate commerce unless given specific instruction from Congress. Maine's residency requirement for medical marijuana licensing is an example of an excessive regulation to that end, the panel's majority found. So again, it goes back to, in fact, when I was reading about this, and David Rabinovitz, he's kind of our resident historian. The Rohrabacher Farr Amendment is playing a role in this too, I guess, as you look at this, because that has been renewed every year since 2014. And Congress has acknowledged that this market may continue to exist in some circumstances free from federal criminal enforcement. And the reaction from the cannabis industry community that I've been reading, these comments online, feel like this is a great kind of a shot across the bow again to Congress to understand that something has to be happen. There has to be some kind of reform. And I'm going to guess it's going to help you out in the trenches, right?
Well, absolutely. But let's look at this historically a little bit. So you go back to 2005 with the Supreme Court case of Gonzalez v. Raich, where the federal government basically said that they can continue to prosecute people even if they're in compliance with state law, because even somebody having a small amount of plants in their house, or having a small collective of plants with other patients, is technically a way to, or will influence interstate commerce. And this goes all the way back to like an old case called Wickard v. Filburn. So that was like kind of the start of this. And then now we have so many people that are trying to get something done with interstate commerce here. And this ruling, I think, is very interesting, but I think it's going to take a lot of legal heads to kind of parse out what exactly it means. And it's also only precedent for that particular circuit. And if you look at the issues of what Maine was trying to do, which was trying to keep basically the industry completely in-state and homegrown. You know, that is a laudable goal, but at the same time, that also prevents any sort of out-of-state investment in any of the companies that might be trying to get a leg up, particularly small businesses that don't necessarily have access to either in-state or traditional lending.
Yeah.
So it's a very complicated issue.
Of course it is. And I don't understand most of it other than what I read. And I'm a good reader. So I'm going to read this again about the appellate court ruling is limited in scope, that it currently is only directly affecting states within its jurisdiction, which covers Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Puerto Rico, and Rhode Island. How did Puerto Rico get in New England? That's what I'd like to know on that. Does anybody have any idea? Josh, everybody, we're shaking our heads.
I honestly don't know.
I mean, just because Alex Cora is the manager of the Red Sox, I mean, I don't get it. I mean, is that the only thing? I'm only kidding. So you're right about this, but Josh, I'm sure you have a question for Morgan regarding this. I'm just going to see if I can find any other key moments in this this article and share.
Well, just to get everybody up to speed, Dormant Commerce Clause is referring to the prohibition of the illicit in the Commerce Clause. So that's against states passing legislation that discriminates against the excessively burdensome interstate commerce. So you have Oregon that passed a law a few years ago that said they can buy and sell cannabis all day long once it becomes federally legal. But to get people up to speed, how can states supersede federal law? So if the whole West Coast, Alaska, Vancouver, British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, California, they're all legal, why can't we trade in between? It's because federal law says we can't. So the Dormant Commerce Clause, I don't understand how that could even be something that's looked at because of the feds. You can't have state law supersede federal laws. Am I right on that, Morgan, or does this have some other bearing that I'm unaware of?
Well, you're absolutely right. But at the same time, every single state law regarding cannabis, whether it be adult use or recreational or medical, is in violation of federal law. So technically, states could enter into interstate compacts, but they would be in violation of federal law. I feel like most state legislatures, as well as most state regulators for cannabis systems, feel like that might just be a step too far and would bring the hammer down on them. But they could do it and see what happens. Just like every single state that has passed sensible cannabis policy reform has done so so far. But the Dormant Commerce Clause really kicks in as soon as federal law changes, which means that you can be able to trade in this substance and transport it across state boundaries regardless. So, if say Nebraska continues to be an illegal state, once cannabis is legal federally, you can't, Nebraska would not be able to stop people from shipping cannabis through its territorial borders, and the federal government would not be able to stop states from entering into either interstate compacts or just doing business across borders. So it does create a lot of considerations that both state and federal lawmakers need to think about when they're approaching this. I haven't read this opinion thoroughly yet, but I would think that it doesn't really necessarily say that all of a sudden interstate commerce is legal. And anybody that is saying such, I think you need to really take it with a grain of salt and consult a ton of lawyers before you start shipping across state lines, because while it might not be an enforcement priority, you will still be doing that one thing that the feds are still really kind of iffy about. Even if they're letting states do their own thing, but as soon as you get into interstate commerce, they're going to want to have a much stronger position and a much stronger structure on it. And if people start doing it willy-nilly, I fear that it could create serious crackdowns.
Idaho doesn't even want you to transport hemp. There's a lot of issues just trying to get legal products.
You're absolutely right. I mean, there's still people sitting in jail right now in places like South Dakota for moving federally legal hemp products.
Yeah. Again, there's a lot of issues that are out there, and But I want to continue with this because it says if Maine's residency requirement violates the Dormant Commerce Clause as an unconstitutionally protectionist policy, the same could theoretically be argued about state laws that prioritize licensing people who have been disproportionately harmed by the drug war. So there already is some pushback from the social equity community because we've got Robert Mikos. He's basically saying court decisions like this one could put an end to a lot of social equity licensing programs because those social equity licensing programs have had to rely on the same sort of residency discrimination to work. And that's Robert Mikos' quote from Vanderbilt. And then Shalene Title, who's a very outspoken cannabis advocate and a former commissioner for the original Cannabis Commission in Massachusetts. Now,
Shalene's my dude. She's awesome.
Everybody loves Shalene. I agree. She's now the founder of the Cannabis Regulators of Color Coalition, the CRCC. Here's her quote. The takeaway from an equity perspective is that regulators and people concerned about fair markets should understand the case and be prepared for dominoes to start falling, she said. Being informed and prepared is still the best way to counteract legal confusion and chaos that bigger companies benefit from. You know, Morgan, again, there's definitely a little battle inside the cannabis industry between the multi-state operators and those craft cultivators, the smaller ones. What kind of effect is that going to have on putting pressure to get anything passed in front of our Senate in the next, I don't even know, make it a decade at this point, because it doesn't look like anything's going to happen anytime soon.
I'm not even going to hazard a guess. But what I will say is that, one possible iteration of this ruling is that small businesses might be able to get additional funding from out of state in places where they were not allowed to do so. I mean, we all know, and, like groups like MCBA and others have all been just like harping on this, that, while we're getting very limited benefits and like emphasis on very limited from state level social equity programs, the best way to deal with these problems is to remove license caps. So I'm not sure if this particular ruling would necessarily have an impact on that. But all that being said, I think that we're really going to have to like dive into this, because I think that it could have, a lot of unforeseen consequences, both good and bad. I think that it kind of caught everybody a little bit off guard, and nobody is really sure exactly what this is going to mean. What I know for sure is that it's going to continue to be tied up in the courts, and this ruling is going to engender a whole lot more lawsuits for any sort of state protectionist structures. And unfortunately, most of the social equity programs that exist right now are based on limited license programs, which by their very nature are a little bit protectionist and might be thrown into a tumult because of this ruling. Right. But again, only within the jurisdiction of that particular circuit.
So Andrew Klein, I think you probably recognize, I don't know if you recognize that name. I do, senior counsel at Perkins Cole.
I respect Andrew quite a bit. I used to work with him at NCIA.
So he says there may be other non-protectionist reasons that states choose to ban such commerce under the status quo of federal prohibition. His quote, "It could be protectionist. It could also be that those state rules are in place because everyone, including state legislatures and state regulators, have been under the impression that the Controlled Substances Act prohibits interstate commerce. Therefore, they're trying to sort of walk a fine line between abiding by some portion of the federal law while allowing for state sales." Does that make sense to you? His quote about
I mean, it's pretty pretty complicated, and I think that that's a definite good point. But when you come back to it, every single cannabis system violates the Controlled Substances Act. So it really comes down to a question of how far are people going to push it.
Yeah, and it says Klein said this decision should send a clear message to Congress that without action on federal cannabis reform that thoughtfully accounts for the complications of interstate commerce between divergent state markets, the industry will continue to find itself grappling with issues like this dormant commerce clause case. And this is his quote again. This is Andrew. In some ways, this ruling is a shot across the bow for the industry. And in some ways,
it's a shot across the bow for Congress, more importantly, because I think that Andrew is absolutely right.
Right.
You know, a system of laws where large and multi-million-dollar economic systems are technically illegal, but are being tolerated, and the piecemeal system that we have is not sustainable. And I think that this ruling kind of really it highlights the fact that federal law is standing in the way. Now we have all sorts of systems where state laws differ about things. I mean, alcohol still is one of those things where there are differences between state to state, and
Right.
there are also rules regarding interstate commerce when it comes to alcohol. Like some states will not, or some states have more stringent rules when you want to import beer or liquor than other states. They have more strict labeling rules. You have to go through more hoops and whatnot, and that is clearly going to continue in the cannabis system. But the fact that we have such a huge dichotomy between state and federal law, and states are continuing to move in the right direction on this, more and more states every year, and we're looking at potentially like 4 or 5 that could turn in November. I think that this court ruling is really a clear signal for Congress to get off their asses.
That's right, 100%. He says, this is Andrew again. It's a shot in the arm for the industry because the First Circuit recognized that a robust interstate market already exists that is likely to attract entrants far and wide and is supported by congressional action through the Rohrabacher-Farr law or clause or whatever. And one other little note here. New Jersey State Senate President Nicholas Kottari filed a bill this month that would authorize the governor to enter into agreements with other legal states to import and export cannabis. So this is just beginning. And you know what? Clarence Thomas is sitting there going, see, I told you these laws were screwed up, right? And he's right. I mean, and it's another reason why, and Josh, you've probably heard me say this. Morgan, I know you've said this. You want to invest in the cannabis industry, invest in a cannabis industry law firm, okay? Because they are going to make money no matter what the law says, right?
Well, I mean, a great person to speak with about interstate commerce issues is Adam Smith. I believe he's still with the Craft Cannabis Alliance up in Oregon, and he's been working on getting states to pass interstate commerce compacts that would be triggered as soon as they were allowed by federal law. And I think that at some point, some states might just say like, we're just going to go ahead anyway, regardless of federal law. But we'll see. At the end of the day, though, I think that it's really great to see that courts are recognizing that, not only do we have a vibrant multi-state regulated cannabis industry, but interstate commerce is already happening on the unregulated industry and has for decades. So do you want to control it, or do you want to allow the interstate commerce to only be the purview of underground operators?
Yeah. And isn't it interstate commerce when there's an edible product in California that's also available in Massachusetts? It's the same recipe, the same genetics, the same manufacturing. It's all tested. And I mean, seems to me that is interstate commerce. The difference is they grew it and created it in one state to make it exactly the same as the other state. So it's like a license to recreate that recipe in a legal state. To me, that is interstate commerce.
Well, I mean, I think that you're onto something, but at the same time, intellectual property is not necessarily something that is held under the umbrella of interstate commerce. So, you can use the ideas and the methods and whatnot, but unless actual physical material is crossing state borders, it's not technically interstate commerce.
Right. And if it came from a seed, is that a little material, or is that still the gray area in this industry?
I mean, you'd have to talk to a lawyer about that.
Josh, what's your feeling about seeds and genetics? Because all three of us know there's a vibrant market for genetics on the internet.
Yeah, I would say grab as many as you can and store them in a dark, cool place, because if you try to find tobacco seeds, you won't find any anywhere on the planet. So eventually, whether it's 10 or 20 years, it's going to be really, really hard to find good genetics because, like I said, you can't find it in crops like tobacco anywhere.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And you start to see proliferation of certain strains, and then other genetic material starts to kind of go by the wayside or disappear. I mean, I'm a hobby grower, and I save every single piece of genetics that I possibly can, just because I don't know if it's going to be available in the future.
Wow.
Do you have Blue Dream circa 2008? Because that was a pretty phenomenal sativa with its euphoric, energetic, uplifting experience that's been bastardized since with just genetic mutations or whatever. But if anybody's got some Blue Dream from 10 years ago, hit me up.
Me too. Right now, I'm rolling 2005 White Widow strain.
Nice.
And that was the
It's
first.
very weak, which is right where my wheelhouse is.
Blue Dream was the first strain that I bought legally when visiting California 6 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. And I do remember it, and I do enjoy that strain as well. Hey, Morgan, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, what's the latest on that CAO bill? Is it, excuse me, I know it's not going to go anywhere fast, but Cory Booker made a few little noise this week when he said, again, he's more concerned about the expungement issue than the safe banking issue. Is that a sign of a rift between the senators who wrote this bill?
Not really. Everybody knew that it was going to be pretty much like damn near impossible to get all the votes that you need in order to pass comprehensive cannabis policy reform that includes descheduling. But I think that CAOA, at least in terms of the banking language, does provide a blueprint for what the sponsors are looking for in terms of banking, at least, and also provides a ton of awesome language in terms of social justice and restorative justice. Right now, it's in recess, but there are conversations ongoing about exactly, what we would want added to safe banking, as well as what we would want attached to it, including both federal expungement measures, things like the HOPE Act, which would facilitate state expungement, which is, in my opinion, far more important just because of the numbers. And then, things like veterans access and potentially, firearm protections for medical patients. I think that it's going to be very difficult to get anything across the board in the current Congress that actually provides federal funds to cannabis businesses through things like SBA. But it's definitely something that we're pushing for. And right now we're in a position where we can push for as much as we can possibly get and then draw it back and, have some tokens to trade. But the conversations are happening, which a couple of months ago they weren't, and or at least not to the level that they are at now. And I have a lot of optimism that we're going to get something that involves banking, protections for social equity businesses, as well as restorative justice measures across the finish line this year. Wow. It's going to be difficult, but I think it can happen.
Wow, I love your optimism. It always makes me feel better after I talk with you, Morgan. I really do. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to it.
Well, we just got to let people know to contact their lawmakers so that their lawmakers know that this is something that they actually care about.
Yeah, and I'm actually seeing polls showing more and more states favorably basically supporting legalization or at least decriminalization of the plant. So the movement hasn't gone backwards at all. It's moving forward and it's gaining more and more momentum. And this particular ruling, again, I think will eventually put a little more pressure on our lawmakers to actually get off vacation and get back to work. You get it, right? I know you get it.
I mean, I'm enjoying the break a little bit, but
I get it. I know. I appreciate it. Look, and everybody deserves it. It's a summertime, and it's been one of the hottest summers on record. At least they do recognize that there actually is a concern about climate change now. That being said, it still was a 50-50 split with the vice president making that vote to get that climate change bill passed. And I'm very discouraged about our system right now, but I also know it's the best one in the world. I'll be patient and I'll make it. We'll get through it. In the meantime, we're way past 4:20. Morgan, thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to talking with you again next month, and bring that optimism with you. Will you please? I love that.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and it's always like, one step forward, one step back, one step forward, one step back, but things are heading in the right direction. It's victory is on the horizon. When it's going to happen, who knows? But we can't let up.
Right. Is that Cannabis Standard Time? I think that's what it is. All right. Hey, Morgan, thank you. We're going to take our break. We're going to come back. We're going to continue this discussion with some of our regulars on this show and some people that haven't been on for a while. So don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on every night and day. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God. Thank God Jonathan Edwards is joining us.
Hi, everyone. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young, and you're probably wondering, what am I doing on a growing show? After all, I'm a convicted plant killer. That's why I surround myself with these beautiful plastic babies. But now I have found the secret to all those people out there who just don't want to deal with growing a plant indoors or outdoors. You just don't have enough confidence. Hey, check out greengoddesssupply.com. That's where you'll find the armoire system. Basically, it's growing for dummies like me. Check it out. The armoire at greengoddesssupply.com. Oh my God. Welcome back to Green Rush Live for Friday afternoon here in Pro Cannabis Media. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. Very proud to have a live phone in Zoom call talk show on the business of cannabis every Friday here at Pro Cannabis Media on all those social media platforms that we're on, like your YouTube, your LinkedIn Live, your Facebook Meta, and Twitch. And did I forget one? Yes, Pro Cannabis Media, now streaming 24/7 live on our homepage. So you want to check that one out too. Josh Kincaid is with us from the left coast, and an old friend, David Rabinovitz, has joined us in here because he has been the champion for interstate commerce. And before David, before I pat you on the back, I'm patting you on the back. So see if you can control yourself, because I'd really like to welcome in our media guy, Zach Huffman from Grown In. It's a great newsletter. I read it on a regular basis. His beat is the New England area. And Zach, pleasure to meet you and welcome to Green Rush Live.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
How did it come about? How did you end up with that gig with Grown In? And then we can give a plug a little bit for the other Grown In newsletters that are out there.
Sure. So, well, first I'll start with Grown In itself. I think they're going on like roughly 3 years now that they've been around.
Yep.
And for about the first 2 years of Grown In's existence, it primarily covered the Midwest, Illinois, Michigan, Missouri, and then Ohio. Last fall, they started expanding their coverage, and their first kind of step outside of the Midwest was New England. So I live in Massachusetts. So they were looking for a reporter who was local, and I got lucky. So before then I had I've written for local papers in the Boston area. I wrote for Courthouse News for about 5 years, which is why I have no choice but to cover this main case.
Right.
And then for the last 10 years off and on, I've also written for Dig Boston. So alt
Gotcha.
media is kind of in my wheelhouse.
I gotcha. Well, alt media, I always came from traditional media, and now I'm part of the alt media, I guess, because we are just talking about cannabis 24/7 here. Walk us through this ruling by this circuit court and what implications it has, not only for the state of Maine, but perhaps for interstate commerce all over the United States.
Well, this this ruling starts with Maine's residency requirement. And so Maine, initially, they required that all owners, managers, basically anyone who can make a decision, whatever, it was kind of broadly defined in a company that either was providing medical or adult use had to be a resident of Maine. Now, before this current, lawsuit that we're talking about, the NGP or Wellness Connection, they had actually sued the state over the adult use residency requirement. And during that, and that was in federal court. And during that federal case, the state essentially reached a settlement saying, all right, we're just not going to enforce the residency requirement for adult use. And can we just drop this case? And that's what happened. And then, of course, a couple months later, they move on to the medical market. And so you have the same companies, Wellness Connection, who Wellness Connection is a locally owned, homegrown company in Maine, but Acreage wants to buy them, and so Acreage cannot buy them with this residency rule in place. So they sued again, and this time you had a patient activist group get involved that kind of helped push forward when the state may not have been willing to fight. I mean, that's just speculation. At the federal level, the judge ruled against the state, saying that this rule violates the Dormant Commerce Clause of the Constitution. And that's kind of what was being appealed. So I don't know how much you've kind of discussed that like aspect of it.
Oh yeah. Well, David will debrief, because he's the one who found Robert Mikos, this Vanderbilt professor, who wrote a paper about it, got published, and David read it because David reads everything. David, I'm sure you have a few questions, some comments about this whole thing.
Well, no, I'm going to let Zach keep going, because the article that I wrote back in April was a result of two things. It was Zach's coverage on, I believe, April 7th or April 8th of the case that was just decided. He covered the oral arguments, and I think did a phenomenal job on that. And so I'm going to let Zach keep going. I think what I did built upon a lot of what he already had done. So I think I'm going to leave it to the expert here with the foundation.
Well, he's on the beat, that's for sure. Go ahead, Zach.
I mean, in case you couldn't tell, David and I have had several conversations about this topic in the past. So we are both very aware of where the other one stands. So, the state lost at the federal level, and of course they appealed with the support of this activist group. Sorry, the exact names are escaping me. So they appealed to the First Circuit. And then during those oral arguments, it definitely seemed like the panel, they argue before at the First Circuit, you argue your case before a panel of 3 judges. And it seemed like for the most part, they were taking the side of the company that this does, in fact, violate Dormant Commerce Clause. And the important distinction is it's easy to kind of look at this and say, oh, well, the Dormant Commerce Clause is supposed to regulate interstate commerce, over commerce over state borders. That doesn't exist in cannabis because you can't, bring weed over the border. What was argued by, Acreage and Wellness Connection was that it wasn't cannabis that was being transferred over state lines, it was investment dollars. And so that's really what they were arguing, is that the investment market for cannabis was being unfairly restricted by this residency requirement. And the First Circuit seemed to agree, at least, 2 out of the 3 panel judges.
Josh, I don't want to ignore you. If you've got some comments or questions for Zach or David, knock yourself out.
I'm actually curious about that area. Was the legalization process through a ballot measure, or was that done through legislation and not on a vote?
Adult use in Maine was a ballot measure.
It was a ballot measure. Okay. Are you seeing that being a difference? Because with a lot of ballot measures on the West Coast, there's a lot less corporate interests, right? Whereas some of these limited license states have a lot of influence from a very small amount of folks. And then that can really kind of change or dictate on how things are being done. So do you have a feeling that there's a lot of lobbyists being pushed behind this, or is this still kind of an open free market?
I mean, there's certainly, lobbyist influence. It's kind of hard to tell what the difference is, looking, obviously my perspective is very much New England. And so I do have a mix of those versions, or those varieties. Massachusetts and Maine were both legalized adult use through the ballot. But say Connecticut, Vermont, and Rhode Island did it through the legislature. It does seem like, for instance, in the case of Connecticut, that the way it's been legalized through the legislature has been a way that very much benefits a very, specific set of operators. So, I guess in theory, there is more opportunity when it is ballot based. But at the same time, I mean, at least with Maine, although the although the voters legalized it in 2016, it took a while to be legalized because, of course, the next step is the legislature has to write the rules. And at the time, Maine had a governor named Paul LePage, who was a kind of one of the old school Tea Party candidates who came in that first wave against Obama, like I think 2010 maybe he got elected. He was very much anti-weed, and so he spent most of his time in the governor's office fighting any efforts from the legislature to fulfill the will of the voters. So it took a bit longer for Maine, and perhaps that gave more time for the legislature to kind of be more specific in how they're crafting this. But I mean, yeah, sorry.
David, from your standpoint in the bubble that you're sitting at on the East Coast, are you seeing the same thing where the ballot initiatives have maybe less influence versus there may be more protectionism is what I'm curious about from the legislative standpoint. If there's lobbyists and interested groups, they're not going to want to push for this interstate commerce because they're going to want protectionism. Are you seeing that?
I don't know if I'd say I'm seeing that, but obviously the MSOs, the larger MSOs have money now, and if they have money, they're going to hire whatever you want to call it, advisors, attorneys. They're ultimately people who are going to be lobbying on their behalf, right? Mm-hmm. Versus the grassroots folks who are putting the questions are trying to get a much purer market with a lot more equity in it. So I'm not sure how I'd respond to that. I think that by the time legislation gets passed, the local advocacy groups are in the legislators' ears. Look what just happened in Massachusetts. It took 2 years, but the governor signed a bill that upended our regulatory structure, at least as to how municipalities grant the local approval, right? Mm-hmm. And it is much more leaning toward what the grassroots folks wanted than what the institutional municipalities wanted. So I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer your question, but I don't know that there's outsized influence one way or the other, whether it's legislatively created or done at the ballot box by voter initiative.
Zach, I'm sure you know Shalene Title, the former commissioner, right?
Yep.
She's obviously concerned what this ruling might be, what effect it might have on social equity applicants. How's your read on that?
I mean, there's certainly a possibility that this could have a negative impact on social equity applicants. I think the important thing to remember, though, with this ruling is this isn't a ruling that's changing anything like from one day to the next, you know, like now that it's been ruled that the Dormant Commerce Clause can regulate weed, it doesn't mean tomorrow you're going to have trafficking over the state border. There's a lot of other dominoes that have to fall.
Right.
And it's possible this could lead towards more legal battles against social equity status, but you know, they'll have to be initiated, you know?
Yeah. I think Mikos was quoted in an article yesterday, and that's what he pointed out is if you can't restrict out-of-state parties in favor of in-state parties, does that mean that a lot of the in-state social equity programs could be challenged on the grounds that in Massachusetts, home delivery and social consumption licenses are exclusively available to social equity folks. And to qualify for social equity, you have to be a Mass resident. So that means that an out-of-stater can't get those licenses. I'm not sure how that all falls out. That's way above my research grade. And frankly, I'm not that focused on it, really. I can't see them saying, well, we're going to cut. First off, a case is going to have to go all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to say, we don't want any more affirmative action type stuff, even in cannabis. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure how far they're going to go.
Isn't the Supreme Court saying, don't put any more cannabis cases in front of us, please?
I mean, other than Clarence Thomas, I think that's where they're going. But
right, they don't want to have to deal with it.
This is not far, Jimmy, from what you've heard out of my mouth for the past year, which is I don't think that Washington, D.C. is going to do anything for cannabis. I don't think they can get out of their own way. Even the people that are pro-cannabis don't understand the market, which is why their bills come out and the industry craps all over them. I mean, I believe for a while, and I said it back in April, marijuana legalization in the United States is going to get handled by the courts. And when the right case goes to the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas has pretty much already said, I think he's going to come down under the 12th Amendment of equal protection and say, you can't allow one group that's got money and more white guys in it to be dealing in cannabis and then go after poor street dealers who are people of color and lock them up for the same thing. Right? Not equal protection under the law. You either enforce it and say marijuana is illegal, or you say it ain't illegal and you step away from it.
Yeah. I mean, and that, do you think, again, I just had Morgan Fox on, and everybody knows I get very frustrated about the political divide that is in our U.S. Senate right now, because I can't, we're not governing. They're not governing. They're staying elected. And that is wrong. And now the Supreme Court has become politicized. So there's two branches right there, guys, that I'm a little concerned about, right? Or at least 1.5 branches. But where's this going to go, Zach? What do you think will be the implications of this? Or is it really almost symbolic that something's wrong here? It is a shot across the bow. The industry is going to glom onto this and saying, look, interstate commerce is coming, whether you guys legalize this or not, it's here. We're going to fight it forever. Where do you think we're going to go with that?
I mean, I think there's certain, if we're looking at an end game of legalization, right? I feel like there's a number of different paths. You have more and more states that are willing to legalize. That's going to increase it. That's going to increase the palatability of it as an issue, I think. I don't see a solution in the U.S. Senate anytime soon, but I do also think a lot of the progress we're gonna see will be done through the courts. I mean, there's a lot of creative lawyers, and that's really what it takes. Get a creative lawyer, find your case, and you can, chip away at prohibition that way.
How much of these companies are going to be losing out in the meantime, though? Because anytime you have investors sitting on the sideline waiting for volatility to calm down, waiting for uncertainty to figure itself out, you're wasting a lot of time and a lot of opportunities. First mover advantages are moving away. Mm-hmm. Time value of money is being diminished. And so, I just talked to an investor earlier today who was talking about these social justice warriors going out there and trying to get everything they want. And I'm all for social equity. I think there's been a lot of damage with the war on drugs with minorities. But at the same time, the virtue signaling in politics with bureaucrats who really don't care except for the pennies that they earn. It seems like they're just moving from one side to another, one topic to another, talking one side of their mouth, not really doing anything. I don't see action. I just see virtue signaling from bureaucrats. Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, you have all of these people who actually need something to move. All of these entrepreneurs, business people, people of color that want to get into the industry. Are we actually going to do something? Or are we just going to sit here and destroy the potential investment opportunities that these folks have?
Josh, do you think that that's something that needs to be done at the federal level or the state level?
I think it needs to be something done at the state level and have the feds just get out of the way.
I mean, you got to look at viability. Federal's not going to do it. State seems to be willing in some cases.
Yep. Right.
Massachusetts just passed the law I was mentioning earlier. They're going to direct, I think it's 15% of the tax revenue into a separate fund where they will provide either grants or loans to social equity applicants who are trying to get into the business. I mean, I think that's going to be huge. I spoke to a social equity applicant the other day. He was all excited about it. I tried to temper his enthusiasm with, this isn't going to happen until next spring because they're not putting money up. They're saying take money out of sales tax revenue. And it's going to take a while before that gets funded in any meaningful way. Plus, they got to get whatever institution is going to pass this money out. They have to put that together, recruit board members, decide whether they're only funding full operations or they're going to give people exploratory grants or that type of thing. But I think that's at the state level. I think that's what's going to solve the problem you're referring to of getting social equity folks standing up in the business. I think the feds are only going to be in the way. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Zach, I want to ask you about your beat. How many of these meetings, New England's it's a pretty big territory. You're traveling all over from Augusta to to Boston to Hartford. I mean, how do you get around to cover all these states?
Well, I will say I am, one of the fortunate repercussions of, COVID is that everyone does their meetings remotely. So that's how I'm able to kind of keep up.
Hasn't that helped? Wait, hang on a second. Hasn't Zoom helped news gathering?
I think it has to some extent.
Yeah.
It's, in the perfect world, if I could travel all the time, I mean, being in person is always going to be a little better, but this absolutely has increased, access to public meetings. And that aspect I think has been huge. I've been able to cover meetings in, the meetings I've regularly followed where, I've done the main medical work group meetings, obviously Mass CCC over in Worcester. I'm in the South Shore of Massachusetts, so even that will be a little bit of a Vermont's meetings I cover, Connecticut Social Equity Council. Most of the actual travel I might do is just visiting grow sites, to be honest.
Why grow sites and not dispensaries, Zach?
Well, I go to dispensaries,
okay.
but not officially.
I understand. I know. I understand. So let me ask you a question about as a media member, how much of your time is on digging or as opposed to regurgitating what's at these meetings?
I mean, it's a mix. I mean, covering the meeting is always a good way to capture information that everyone's following, but I spend most of my day digging. I mean, there's only so many articles I have to write. And that's especially the case now. Grown In recently kind of shifted its format. For the longest time, we had, or at least for the last year, for the most part, we had separate newsletters for regions. We had a Midwest, New England, and then we had a Mid-Atlantic newsletter. We've kind of done away with that. And now we just have the general Grown In newsletter Monday, Wednesday, Friday, where between me and Mike Forche, my editor, we write more in-depth columns. So, I mean, we're not following the day-to-day meetings as much, but yeah, it's a lot of digging now.
What is the best way, Zach, that you're able to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of the industry to either adapt or pivot to stay relevant?
I think part of it is one thing that actually really helps us, if you look at our newsletter, is in every edition, we have aggregation of local news. Mm-hmm. So we'll just look at what the news stories are that involve cannabis for the last week in our different regions. And honestly, just gathering that kind of keeps me up to speed. I keep my eyes on social media. I follow a lot of these meetings to see what the results are. And I think that's very helpful to kind of keep me up to speed. And as long as I always have a new question to ask, that, is an easy way to push me forward.
Mm-hmm. How much, when you mentioned social media, are you getting accurate information from social media, or are you getting reaction to what passes at some of these meetings?
Well, I mean, you get reaction. Now, if you look at social media, you're not always going to get a direct, accurate piece of information from there. But for instance, let's say, you're writing about a company that got in trouble for, say, stealing tips from their employees. And maybe you go on Reddit and you find a couple of people who are saying, yeah, I worked at this company and it was terrible. So I reached out to them directly. I got them to prove it to me. They actually showed me reports they filed with the state about the tip theft. And now I've got sources who can give me that side of the story. You take it with a grain of salt, but yeah.
Right. No. It again, as long as you're getting to the person who posted it or has an inside of it, I think, and in a lot of ways, that has been a good thing for the turn away from traditional media. And now we have more alternative sources out there. And, as someone who spent 30 years in newsrooms, I just can't believe now how easy it is for these newsrooms to just report on what's on Twitter. Okay. And I mean, it's a quote thing. It just, here's a quote, and they put it up, and that's a news story because it depends on who it came from. And if it's, related to a news story, they put it out there. And I don't know. I like the idea of the digging. I like the old days of the phone calls and working the calls and all that. And then developing sources and that you can reach out to, face to face or Zoom to Zoom, at this point.
I got a question about social media and why cannabis is ideal for influencer marketing. And is social media actually worth the blood, sweat, and tears?
I mean, I'd say from what I understand, it's debatable whether it's actually worth it. I mean, there's only so much of attention, say, I create for myself in terms of what I do on social media. But I do know that, I'm able to find information that way. I just don't know how effective it is for self-promotion.
What makes it so ideal for influencers? Is it because it's new, because there's no like existing dominant folks in there? I mean, what makes it so ideal for influencers?
I think it definitely contributes to the success of influencers because there aren't any, because it is new. There's this opportunity for lots of folks to kind of go that route,
Mm-hmm. David, what's some stories that aren't being covered right now that you want to see more of?
Oh, gee, that's a great question, Josh. I'm actually not certain on that one.
You sent me an article about REITs back in April that are going to be crashing down. That
was my build on Zach's article and the reporting. The premise of that whole article was this case. And I do recall Jimmy telling me I got shredded by some of the guests he had on who thought the whole thing was a joke. And lo and behold, 2 days ago, that opinion came out of the first district. And what did they quote? They referred to Rohrabacher Farr, the budget amendment, which was, as I laid out how I see the dominoes falling, that's one of the first dominoes that I think is going to fall. I'm sticking by everything I had in that April 25th article. And to anybody who's watching live, if you're on YouTube, it's in the chat, the link.
Just because you're early doesn't mean you're wrong, David.
That's right. It just means you get ridiculed more, but that's okay.
That's one of the things people don't look at when they look at the cannabis industry is the influence of REITs and real estate value.
Yeah. So if Massachusetts prices are going down right now. And Aaron Goins, who's been on the show in the past, called me the other day and was telling me he was in a dispensary in Brockton, and I think they had $25 eighths. But if you bought a second eighth, you got it for like 50% off, something like that. And
yeah, that's my dispensary. Yeah.
Right. And we did the math real quick. And what we determined was they're selling it at retail at about $1,500 a pound. Right. Start to think about those kind of numbers. Well, that means wholesale. If you're going to live right, you got to be selling it at $7.50 a pound. Prices are coming down. And as they come down, I'm sticking by what I had in that Canary article on cannabis.net, that the big MSOs are the ones who need to keep the protectionist walls up. They can't afford, with their expensive indoor grow facilities, to allow cheap West Coast weed to come in. And I'll tell you where that cheap West Coast weed is going. It's going to all the social equity players, because those are the folks who didn't have the money to become fully integrated. So you either you grow it in-house and it's real expensive, and you're competing against some little operator down the street who's bringing it in from the West Coast and undercutting you on price. I think it's going to just be a fantastic time to be in the lower end of the weed business.
Yeah. Yeah. Are we looking at a house of cards? Is it a race to the bottom here? Zach, what do you think?
I think to some extent, certainly if you're viewing it as in terms of investment opportunities. Because when it starts, everyone is, when the market starts in a state, everything's exaggerated, and then, people want to return, and that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think the house of cards is already, I made a prediction a while ago that I said 2022 is going to be the year of musical chairs. And a few months ago, a couple of merger and acquisition guys I know called me up and they said, explain to us what you mean by that. And I said, you're going to start to see the larger MSOs. Like Massachusetts, you're limited to 3 retail licenses. I said, you're going to see the people who've got 3 stores in Massachusetts are going to look at the worst store in their portfolio and say, you know what? Let's get rid of that store and let's go get a license in a much better location. And that's exactly what's going on right now. We've seen it a couple of times. The MSOs is trading up their locations. Next year is going to be the year of the undertaker. We're going to start to see in a market like Massachusetts, we're going to start to see people going out of business. There's no doubt in my mind. We've got about total number of retail licenses. I was analyzing this earlier today in the state. This is coincidental, is 420. Out of those 420, 188 of them are provisional licenses. There's just about, it's like 45% of the licenses that are out there are for stores that are not yet open. So there's about 232 stores open, I think it is.
242, I think, actually, David. I think
Yeah,
I looked that up. I looked that up.
Really?
Sounds about
Because the
right.
stuff I pulled off the commission this morning,
The commission's 3 months behind, okay,
Right.
when it comes to the public report.
I know that. But so they had 232, whether it's 232 or 242, right?
Yep.
It still is. Think about the fact that prices are coming down, right? Dispensaries are offering deals of buy 1/8 for 25 and get the second eighth for half price. And we only have 50% of the stores open that have licenses. Do you understand how crushing that could be to the market if all these other 180 odd licenses actually open up?
That's right.
Well,
I
yeah,
get it.
yeah, and I would also add that this has been covered and grown in by my editor Mike. I mean, just look at Michigan. With their growing seasons, everything's bottoming out there. Like, that's a state that's now starting to see closures.
Yep.
Right.
And they started, I think, after us.
Right. Well, yeah.
Well, they
and-
just went nuts, I guess, with the cultivation licenses. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Again, this is why I love doing live shows more than anything else, because we really can look at what's going on now and today, and then look back at it like David's been doing and saying, see, we talked about that 4 or 5 months ago. It's a fascinating time. It's why this Pro Cannabis Media Group exists. And we're certainly happy to have people on that we can count on, like David. And Zach, I tell you what, man, you're welcome here any Friday. You come up with a story you want to push Grown In, you're welcome on any one of these shows. All right.
Sounds good.
How do
Sounds like we're
people?
going to a commercial break, Jimmy.
I'm going to a commercial break.
Right.
Is that all right?
I'm gonna jump because I got a 5 o'clock client call that I'm 3 minutes
Who's
late.
running this? Is that
All right,
Dave
you
or
go ahead.
Jim?
Go ahead. You can. Well, it's a group effort, actually, Zach. David, thank you. Great to see you, Zach. How do people sign up for Grown In? You just Google it, right?
Yeah, grownin.com, grownin.com, or shoot an email to Zach, ZACK, at grownin.com.
I think you and Mike and the rest of the team do a great job. It is must reading if you are in this industry, because I think of all of the people of all those newsletters, I really think you guys turn it around faster than some of these others that are repurposing content from like even 2 and 3 years ago. Sometimes I'm seeing now.
Yeah.
So we like the fresh stuff. Zach Hoffman from Grown In, thank you. Josh, stick around. We've got another journalist coming in from New Jersey. Dan Uloa from Hetty, New Jersey is going to join us next. Don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
Hey, You want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information.
Hi, everyone. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young, and you're probably wondering, what am I doing on a growing show? After all, I'm a convicted plant killer. That's why I surround myself with these beautiful plastic babies. But now I have found the secret to all those people out there who just don't want to deal with growing a plant indoors or outdoors. You just don't have enough confidence. Hey, check out greengoddesssupply.com. That's where you'll find the armoire system. Basically, it's growing for dummies like me. Check it out. The armoire at greengoddesssupply.com.
This edition of Green Rush Live is supported by Canna Business Resources, helping you grow with Canna Business funding. Check them out at cannabusinessresources.com.
And welcome back to another live Friday edition of Green Rush Live here on the Pro Cannabis Media Network. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. Josh Kincaid is alongside here today, as he is on a somewhat regular basis now. And in fact, I think Josh might be soloing next week when we preview a cannabis science and research convention down in Baltimore. So I think that's going to be a very interesting show. Josh, you're pretty familiar with that science and research group, aren't you?
I have, yeah. I went down to Oregon, I think in 2016 when they first opened that up. So I've been to almost every single one they've had on the West Coast until they moved to LA just this year. So I'm familiar with the founder. His name's also Josh, right? And I've been to the conference several times.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm looking forward to that show. Everybody should tune into that like you always do. I do see a very active chat room, which is great. I also saw a prediction, and I'm going to throw it out there, and then I'm going to go to Thomas on this, Dan. I'll get to you next. I think weed will be legal in 2025. And I wanted to put in, you mean in the year 2525? Thomas, tell us what's your impressions of this latest court decision coming out of a federal appellate court from Maine about the Maine law as far as limiting licenses and perhaps opening this up to interstate commerce.
Technically that's not what really the Dormant Commerce Clause does, but like these types of cases have been going around district courts. And so like in federal court, district court, circuit court. So the circuit court's finally spoken on it. And, I saw that going around. I'm like, yeah, duh. Because the district courts have been saying this for years, because the Dormant Commerce Clause of the Constitution prevents states from discriminating against out-of-state actors in interstate commerce. And so there is interstate commerce in this illegal product. There has been interstate commerce in this illegal product for decades. And then the dormant commerce aspect of it refers to this negative implication rather than expressed text. So in theory, if they legalized it and said it's okay for states to discriminate against other states in their regulation of their in-state cannabis markets, they could. But that means that they would have to first speak on the matter. And so for right now, as long as the cannabis remains illegal, there will be this Dormant Commerce Clause problem. And we've filed actions pursuant to it. I got several actions on it in Illinois to invalidate the social equity and in-state residency requirements there. And these types of in-state residency requirement invalidations have been successful previously. I've read opinions in Illinois, not dispositive, but the judge knew what was going on, just like the judge knew it was judges, a panel. It was an appellate circuit court. The first circuit federal court. I don't know. I never really practiced in front of them, but it has been around for a while, and it's around especially when Congress does not expressly authorize their power through saying that it's okay to discriminate from one state to another. And so until federal law changes, it'll be there.
Right. Just for the record, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit, Thomas. Okay.
Right.
Sure,
Districts, circuits, and then it's different in state and then in federal. And so like the district court is going to be the federal court at that lowest level, and then it goes up to the circuit, which is at the appellate level. I'm in the 7th. That's where Chicago is.
I get you. I mean, Lord knows that. Hey, Dan Uloa from Heady, New Jersey. First of all, it's good to see you back in the Zoom room. I've seen you more at trade shows than I have in our Zoom room show, so I welcome you back. I do want to ask you first of all, your opinion about this decision that came down, and will it impact New Jersey, or is New Jersey already starting to make inroads about saying we should have interstate commerce?
Right. So like the whole interstate commerce thing, well, thank you for having me, but the whole interstate commerce thing is like a pipe dream. And this is just like one way to say, maybe we'll get it. Like I'm not really a legal expert and haven't been following it, unfortunately. I can very much see why Maine did want to have like a buy local provision to protect like their great craft industry, which like a lot of people talk about. So like it's really interesting that way. Not being the lawyer here, I don't know how it's going to affect New Jersey. I do know we do enjoy a good buy local provisions and do want more local owners here. And we do want people of social equity, the people that are being left out of this industry, the small business people that would like an interesting podcast like this.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, the New Jersey social equity provisions are at risk, at least 50% of them. The ones with the long-time residency and they don't call it disproportionately impacted area in New Jersey. I think they call it some type of disadvantaged area pursuant to zip code. That is, and then they don't speak to interstate commerce at all on this decision. It was really about the in-state residency violating the Dormant Commerce Clause, because Congress is not spoken to this. They've just said it's all illegal. Hence, every state has to play by the same rules. And one state's not allowed to prejudice another state in the administration of their current regulated markets. And so when they do these cases, and then it's strict scrutiny. It's not one of those rational basis tests in law. Strict scrutiny means the person bringing it, once they've satisfied the threshold of showing that there is discrimination going against out-of-state actors going on, they're probably going to win. And so that's one of the reasons when this came out, I'm like, good, it was not a surprise. I
really love that we're going to call that these large corporations that want in on the markets discriminated as if they're poor black people in 1953. So they're the ones getting discriminating against, I guess you can similarly get like interesting arguments in that fashion, but it's quite some time here.
Hey, Dan, in this article that I took from Tom Angel in Marijuana Moment, at the very end, it talks about your friend, New Jersey Senate President Nicholas Scutari, who filed a bill that would authorize the governor of that state to enter into agreements with other legal states to import and export cannabis. Is he going to be able to do that?
Yeah, Nick Scutari has a lot of pipe dreams himself too. It's one of these like wishful thinking things. If you want to be at the front of, he also wants to legalize shrooms and allow homegrown shrooms and not cannabis. So there's a lot of interesting things going on in the State House this summer.
Wait, hang a second. He's going to go with homegrown shrooms before New Jersey has homegrown cannabis?
Well, he did introduce a bill with the legalization of magic mushrooms and the whole magic mushroom industry in the infrastructure, and it did include homegrown, and he has not included that provision in any of his legalization bills. So it's a really fun summer in that fashion.
What's the money behind that? That's not logical. That doesn't make any sense. What are the lobbyists behind that?
That's a really good question, Josh. I really wish I knew. I'd like to meet a mushroom lobbyist. I feel like I hear a lot of cannabis people like, that's fun news. I applaud that news, but they themselves are not pushing it. I think it's right. It's one of those things. I think it's like, this is like the start of a process. A lot of times, a bill is going to take a while. And if you're a guy like Nick Scutari, who keeps winning re-election, this might take 6 years, but this is the first bill. You reintroduce it next time. and then so on and so forth. This might be the most expensive version, so you want to compromise. So you take those things out, but you start with this as the bargaining chip.
Mm-hmm. From a media standpoint, you have these small businesses, you have these social equity applicants, you have all of these brands, but there's a million regulations. So what are you recommending cannabis businesses do to promote their brands or products?
I recommend they read HeadyNJ.com and reach out to me to promote their products to the great community here.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
Tom,
Tom, go ahead.
Tom, you got any suggestions on? I mean, you got your own podcast, you've got your own advisory service, tons of regulations, but how are these businesses going to actually promote their brands and products to these interstate potential clients and or investors, business partners, strategic folks? How are they going to do that? What's the best advice you can give to how they can get their name out there?
Hemp-derived Delta-9. I mean, like that, you could just start a website and start selling that interstate and go right around it. But Cookies has like brands of CBD and caps and shrooms and stuff like that. And so they can just do that completely interstate and then get licensing agreements on an in-state by in-state basis, because then you have a brand that's nationwide. Then, of course, depending on what state we're talking about. In New Jersey, one day they may have, and it might be 3 years from now, it might be 5. They may have a glut of growers that are trying to move their product, so much so that one of those hemp companies could say, hey, here's our brand, here's our genetics, here's our IP licensing agreement. We'll pay this packaging fee. We'll be out there hyping your goods all over the internet. And I could see a lot of IP licensing agreements being in the future for those types of companies that are trying to go beyond their own particular state. I still think that, that until it's legal and the feds say it's allowed to discriminate, like one state can discriminate against another state, just for its marketplaces. You're not looking at discrimination when it comes to like a person. We're looking at discrimination when it comes to marketplaces. And so those cases are very clear, and we're starting to see it now at the circuit level. And I don't think there's not going to be a different outcome because that's how the Dormant Commerce Clause works. And so if you want to have that type of discrimination where one state's allowed to preference its own products, cool, you're going to have to build that into the federal regulation, but how do you do that and then still allow for the interstate commerce? And that's going to create a whole bunch of other tricky aspects because you're trying to protect your state's economy. Well, what does that do for states like California and Oklahoma that are like, what do you mean protect our state's economy? I got to move this product. I want to push this product into Tennessee and other states that are going to be federally legal. You're going to have that, these two competing forces against one another, and I'm not sure how it's going to turn out.
I got a question for you, Jimmy. How are you keeping your brand authentic while not selling out to sponsors' interests?
By not having as many sponsors as I want. How's that? Is that a transparent answer or what, guys? Look, it's not easy, and I'm not going to say this realist. I can't give you the real reasons on this, but it is a delicate balance when you're doing live talk or presenting the news, and you have sponsors that are in the industry that want you to cover their events and their stories. And, so we still have to set back and say, is this just another opening of a dispensary, or is there a story here that we can do? And both you guys, well, especially Dan, because you're definitely the journalist here. There's so many good stories in cannabis that aren't being told. And I'm talking about the ones that we all hear. Cannabis saved my life. Cannabis changed my life. Those are the stories that aren't being told, and those are the stories that we'd like to tell. So it's a balance. It really, and you know what? The separation of church and state in journalism has evolved during the commercial period as audiences have changed. They've moved towards getting their information from wherever, whenever, and whomever they'd like to get it from. And so, we'd like to think that every reporter, and Dan, I'd love you to chime in here. I'd love to think that every reporter believes that they're reporting on facts and factual information. But the human element in that is that human is still deciding what are those facts that tell the story best. Dan?
Right, that is right, Jimmy. That is like the heart of it. That is like a big issue. the nature of objectivity and who's really objective. People can talk into like their natural biases and like popular thought, about the nature of the economy, for example. There's a lot of biases if you really read stories like that about those things. I myself say this is muckraking journalism in the fashion of like the early 20th century. Like, I am pro-cannabis. I am on the statewide coalition for legalization that pushed the referendum in 20. So, those are so I'm not going to say like I'm not unbiased here. I am pro-cannabis, and I've covered some of those patient stories and they are great stories. And, it's hard, as like a very humble operation to cover all the stories I want to. And, it is a line to walk there. When some people do want free press, and who deserves free press, we only have 27 dispensaries here in the state of 9 million people. Each of one opening is a story. But to say like when they have new products, is that a story? Maybe not.
Right. So do you think that traditional media, we all know that the stigma is still out there. We all know that there's been signs of normalization and acceptance of this plant medicine in various states, and every state goes through this. But the traditional media outlets, and I'm not going to name them, but I'm going to say network affiliates in each market, are always looking for the industry to stumble, to fail, to make a mistake, so that they can tell that story. Now, whether or not it's factual or not, what I have my biggest beef is they should be able to balance a positive development about a new industry with a negative incident in a new industry. That I don't see. And that's because it's commercial media. That's because they know, hey, did you hear that story about the company that threw out the inert weed in the dumpster? And they got fined $250,000. It was grass clippings. These were inert pieces of cannabis that were grass clippings, and yet they still got fined because they didn't dispose of it properly. But this was
the red tape in the industry, and that is the bias that they're playing into, right? Because who's going to watch like the 11 o'clock news, the 5 o'clock news? Like old people that don't like cannabis.
Hey, I'm turning 65 in 2 weeks. Don't be doing ageism on this show.
I'm not doing ageism. I love old people. Old people got wisdom. They got a lot of need for cannabis products. I'm just saying that like the conservative nature, Jimmy, the people that are unenlightened, in stark contrast to yourself, are their core demographics. If you look at
but what is the chief advertiser on the evening news?
Go ahead.
If you go watch the evening news and they go to a commercial break, what's the commercial about?
Pharma.
Open a box. Cologuard, something like that, where it's and they because they know their trademark law, they always have these fanciful, arbitrary names that they can get trademarked, like Suliva. I mean, I'm not even sure that's a thing. And then it is nonstop pharmaceutical drug commercials, and then they get back to the news. Not one is about cannabis. You get, and then every Super Bowl that goes around, Weed Maps will buy another spot on the Super Bowl, and it'll make news that they aren't allowed to advertise.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and there is a bill. They are talking about allowing ads on traditional TV and radio now in front of the House. And, until these traditional media outlets don't have to listen to the FCC. See, this is the problem, guys. I think anyway. I mean, people still don't know. You could cut your cable, and you could still get broadcast television on your smart TV for free. You don't have to watch television and listen to the radio with a cable or your phone. Because we're so used to now with the phone, we opt into our communication devices. Because we opt in, that means that we're okay. You could swear. You could get away with stuff that you can't get away with on traditional media network affiliates that have to apply for a license every year because the FCC is still protecting the airwaves that nobody's using anymore.
Well, and the corporations are using them, Jimmy. I read a great book about this. It's really interesting, studying the nature of this. And so as like a guy who's like online news and like print journalism is unregulated, protected by the First Amendment, they use the public airwaves, which are regulated by the FCC, but the FCC from its very beginning was like controlled or like overly influenced by the corporations it was supposed to regulate and oversee. Like NBC made dictated policy that there never should have been 4 TV channels in the United States. There were or 3 TV channels that were the big channels. It's ridiculous. It's terrible. That's why this great internet media is so great. We got you guys, we got Thomas in Illinois, we got HeadyNJ.com and Independent Cannabis News in New Jersey.
Yeah, again, but I don't know about you, but I'm being ignored about what we've built here and what we've been doing now for 2 years in media, in my backyard, in my hometown. I haven't been as proactive complaining about it because I would like to think that because we have a national reach, that we built this thing on during the pandemic on Zoom. It's a pretty good story that we can have a national talk show about cannabis. And I don't have to apply to the FCC for this because the internet we're all opting in. We're paying for the right to have access to as many informational outlets as possible. And now the consumer is in charge of what they watch, when they watch, how they watch, as opposed to when the networks first started and it was really commercials. It wasn't as political, Thomas, as you're saying, with the drug companies dictating what is in front of these people because they can afford the high cost per thousands that are now out there because the audiences have shrunk in national and local news. It's all niche casting now, not broadcasting.
It's personalizing the content. So how do you personalize it and yet still reach the masses?
That's right. Well, you know what? A network is a group of stations, a group of like-minded producers. This is what we've built here, And look, Thomas's show, the legalization news. See, I think that's the new one, right, Thomas? We don't mention the C word.
Oh, they don't. It doesn't matter. I'll wake up tomorrow and they'll flag another channel. I mean, they'll flag another one. And so it's in the past month, we've been flagged 24 times, something like that. It's just, you just wake up and it's wow.
Difficulty because you're on their platform versus
but that's running
a WordPress site.
The entire, no, I have several WordPress sites, but then Google is still controlling all of the search traffic. And so Google is batching which search engine is going to, well, it's the only search engine. People call it Googling. And then Google is starting to self-deal a lot more stuff. They don't want you to get off the platform because they're selling ads. And so as a result of that, I'm starting to go back to doing short form scripted material on the channel because that's what Google wants. And then I'm starting to ask, people also ask questions. For example, hey, whatever happened to the fairness doctrine? That's a good one from the past and history.
It is.
And so,
from history,
it's history.
It's history. And so now we're all just living in our own little fantasies. But anyway, Google is still the platform that even if you have a WordPress site that people are going to reach you from. Or how are you going to get it out? You're going to go share it on Facebook. You're going to go try to get a viral on Instagram or TikTok. That's not going to happen. It's all platform based. And so at least with the FCC, it was the airwaves. And then you'd say, hey, at least you have to keep it fair. Now you don't. Now you can get Alex Jones Cuckoo Bananas, that's there just hustling their products. So we have legalization news. It's okay, popular, but it gets throttled, and we just don't grow very fast. I'll see if I can start growing faster, but they don't want you to have 100,000 subscribers out there listening. They don't want that. They want the stuff to continue the same way, and I think that's why when we hang up the feed, we get sicked with a whole bunch of whatever, like porno spam or like drug spam, where people are trying to say, yeah, you can go to this site and buy whatever, or you can go to this site and get whatever. And then it just contributes to the flagging. But it's not very helpful when the whole point is to change this law and to achieve good policy objectives when you're just fighting upstream all the way, because the thing is actually a federal crime to even really talk about, Yeah,
but that's, it's funny. I was a sportscaster for 25 years, and I always felt I was just doing a job. I was serving the public with information. That was my mentality. And I still think I'm serving the public with information. It's just information about a controversial plant. And, so I don't think I've changed that look, but Hey, Thomas, you and I, we are going to talk because we don't want you to keep getting pulled down on YouTube. You deserve your own channel. You deserve your own right to broadcast, to live stream, whatever we want to call it. I love being on with you and Mickey a couple of weeks ago. And what time is your show on Sundays? Can we say that?
Yeah. The show's on Sunday. You can go watch it live. It's 3 p.m. Central, which is 4 p.m. on the East Coast. So we actually do have a 420 somewhere on Sundays. And then I think if I can get into the habit of it again, I'll have like Wednesdays at 2, I'll release the scripted materials, a couple a month. Last week I did one, how much does a dispensary make? And then next week I'll do one, maybe like IP licensing agreements or just something more about actual operations in the business in approximately 8 minutes, because that's what they want. Right. And then like, it's amazing. And so I could go through your data and show you, like, I'll have a podcast, maybe it gets viewed 5,000 times because people are trying to catch up with the cannabis news for that week. Right. And then 20 subscribers. But then I'll do a video about, these are the top states that are going to be legalizing in 2022. 300 subscribers, watched about the same amount of time, simply because it's a formula and they want you to do that formula because they want people on their platform. This is what happens when you become publicly traded. Right. You have to grow, you have to beat on earnings. I want to see treasury stock. You should be buying that stock back. Josh could talk more about that. He's the financial analyst on the panel. Absolutely. But it is up against the last half hour, guys. And we have a special guest coming on next. And you remember books, right? Remember books? I wrote one. Right? I think it's great. And I know somebody's writing one too. But I read this book. And let me tell you, I'm a very slow reader. And I really enjoyed it. And it's about Taras. It's by Taras Batiste. He's going to join us next. And the title is Don't Let It Smoke You, Creating a Non-Toxic Relationship with Cannabis. And it's his journey with the plant from age 12. And I think he may be 30. I think, he's probably around that age, but he was drafted by the Atlanta Falcons. He played for Georgia State University. He's a college football player. We all know the athletes out there that are very pro-cannabis because they don't want to be prescribed opioids for the inflammation that is part and parcel of being an athlete. So Dan Uloa from Heady, New Jersey, and Thomas Howard from Cannabis Legalization News on Sundays on YouTube. Thank you both for joining us. Josh is going to stick around, and we'll be back for the last half hour. Don't go away. Thanks, guys. Hi, everyone. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young, and you're probably wondering, what am I doing on a growing show? After all, I'm a convicted plant killer. That's why I surround myself with these beautiful plastic babies. But now I have found the secret to all those people out there who just don't want to deal with growing a plant indoors or outdoors. You just don't have enough confidence. Hey, check out greengoddesssupply.com. That's where you'll find the Armoire system. Basically, it's growing for dummies like me. Check it out. The Armoire at greengoddesssupply.com. Hey, you want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems. Whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that it actually will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the final half hour of Green Rush Live, our regularly scheduled Business of Cannabis talk show here on Pro Cannabis Media. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, and I haven't reminded you, but please like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, not just Green Rush Live, and also support people like Josh Kincaid and his Talking Hedge podcast, and like Thomas Howard and his cannabis legalization news too, because we're all in it together. Right, Josh?
That's right, Jimmy.
All right. And speaking of someone who's in it together, an accomplished author, an accomplished athlete, his name is Taras Batiste. And Taras, thank you so much for joining us. He wrote this book, guys, and it's called Don't Let It Smoke You, Creating a Non-Toxic Relationship with Cannabis. Taras, first of all, welcome to the show. Why did you write this book?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on the show. I'm happy to be here. Seriously, thank you for making this happen for me. And why I wrote the book. So in the short, I wanted to do both. I wanted to be able to use, but not let it control me and be who I wanted to be. Didn't see anybody doing it at the time that wasn't fitting the stigma. That's why I didn't see anybody doing it at the time. So just put all that mess into a message and wrote about it. And that's what came out of the book out.
One of the neatest things, now I read the book, one of the neatest things that you did for research is you sought out people who were, if we're pro-cannabis, you sought out people who had a different view of the plant medicine. What motivated you to do that?
Exactly. I wanted to hear both sides. I didn't want to be so much pro. I wanted to hear both sides, from the Nancy Reagan campaign, the multi-million-dollar campaign that kind of took over everywhere. So I went to go speak to Carla Lowe out in Sacramento, and that's where I got the information from. And she brought her team in, and they just dumped a bunch of information on me. So it was good. It was helpful.
So you've seen both sides of it, but this plant was part of your life since age 12 when you were introduced to it, typically through what I would consider to be peer pressure. You're comfortable with that, right?
Yeah, peer pressure, more of just environment. Let's just say that. Environment.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you grew up in Georgia?
I grew up in Georgia. I grew up in North Georgia. Went to Cass High School, to be exact. That's where my family is, and just kind of moved and went to Indiana from there. Yeah.
And, when it says, and again, there's a theme in here that is something I am very much conscious of. And it's a question I asked a guy named Dr. Peter Grinspoon about. He's the son of the late Dr. Lester Grinspoon, who wrote the book Marijuana Reconsidered in, I think it was 1970. He's a Harvard professor. And the question I asked him is, how do you tell the difference between an addiction and a dependency? And how, you love this, right? And how do you become not dependent on a product that you enjoy? And I was talking more about caffeine and coffee, because 91% of Americans have a cup of coffee every single day. That to me is a sign of addiction, because if you're not on it, you get a headache, you don't feel as right, we don't focus as much. So now relate all those things to don't let it smoke you.
Yeah. So just to kind of unwind and talk about the first part,
Yep.
I don't know if I have enough knowledge just yet to talk about the difference between an addiction and a dependency. Right?
Okay.
I'm just going to be completely honest about that. But kind of from there, I could tell you what I was dealing with, right? So going through high school, going through college, I was kind of using just to use with friends, and then it kind of went to college around pain management and kind of my own self to kind of relax and suppress certain things. But I felt so good when I was using it, but my coach said it was bad, right? My parents said I shouldn't do it, right? Society said it wasn't the right time to do it at that time, but it made me feel good. So I didn't really understand. My message was kind of mixed in my head. I didn't really understand what was what. So that's why I went out to go do the research, to listen to other people to kind of talk about it. Made me feel normal, right? Like, hey, you can love cannabis. You're okay. You're going to be successful. If you love cannabis, you're fine. So that's why I wrote the book. That kind of speaks to the book. And that's why I was dealing with my dependency and the issues around that.
Now, you were another part of this book that I read is you got a call from a high school football coach, and you went in and you talked to that team. And then I love the little anecdotal story you told about going into the bathroom. Yeah, walk us through that story, because I really think that was a perfect example of the power of an athlete who can relate to other athletes and gain immediate respect because of who you were.
Sure. I think so. First, I talked to McEachern High School out here in Georgia, a big, phenomenal high school out here in Georgia, known for athletes. The coach let me go in there, had the opportunity to speak with them. I think the message sits with athletes so much because we're so like, get better, move forward. The sky is the limit. And the book's not telling you what to do. It's just saying, hey, if you feel like this is getting in your way, if this feel like this is an anchor in your life that's kind of holding you back, just suppress it to the side and move forward. So that's the message that kind of went to the athletes. To get to the story, right after I spoke to the athletes, I went to the bathroom to use the restroom before I left and went home. Heard the kids kind of going back and forth, making jokes around it. Heard a younger kid tell an older kid, hey, do what you do, just don't let it smoke you. It made me smile. It made me feel like it sat with them, and it's going to sit with multiple groups moving forward. So I love that. I love the message. I love how it doesn't tell people what to do, and hopefully it resonates with a bunch of people out here.
Well, and I'm going to give you credit. You poured your emotions and your feelings out into this book. And as someone who's probably, I think I'm close to twice your age, I always have had problems expressing my emotions to loved ones or to people in relationships or whatever. And I've learned that that's not a good thing, that you really do need to share not only your feelings about your use of cannabis, but also just how you feel at that moment in time. And I'm not saying, well, I feel high. No, I feel I'm a little perturbed that I wasn't included in that conversation. Or it really bothered me when you introduced everybody in the room, but not me, or something like that, right? How difficult was it for you to share your emotions for this book?
Very, 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 very difficult, especially with my siblings at that time being against it. But society was coming so legal. Like, I remember going to West Coast, going to UCLA, playing with some athletes out there, and they would use all the time. And then I would go to Indiana, and they were like, no, you can't do it here. So, it was kind of ups and downs for sure, kind of all over the place. But society in the world was bridging it, and so was the message. So I felt like it was the right time to let it out to the world, for sure.
Yeah. Josh, I know that you have not read the book, but I think you're familiar with the story, if you will. If you've got any questions for Taras, I'm just going to put you right on the spot. Go ahead.
Yeah, very, very similar to a lot of other athletes. I was friends with Cliff Robinson, rest in peace. He was with the Portland Trailblazers. I spoke to Ricky Williams last year, who both players in the NBA with Cliff Robinson got, I think, busted at least 6 times. Ricky Williams ended up just walking away entirely from the NFL. And that's because, like you mentioned, the difference in the messaging, right? They felt good. They knew that was prolonging their athletic abilities. And yet the institutions that they work for said, no, not going to do it. And when we look at the MLB, predominantly white, they don't test. National Hockey League, predominantly white, they don't test. The NBA, predominantly black, they don't test. So I don't know if it's racist, but why is the NFL so slow to adopting these principles?
Well said. Well said. I don't have that question, but I'm glad you brought that up. Great point.
When you were in the NFL, was the culture a lot different? I would imagine people were keeping it secretive, but did you find that the majority were using?
Yes, absolutely. Everybody used in their own way. And that's across all sports arenas, right? But speaking to the industry that I was in, yes, absolutely. Yep.
And it isn't about the testing is not the reason why the testing is well known in the sports community is because they don't want to let their teammates down more than anything else. It's the people in the locker room that it's really their family. Am I speaking out of turn here, Terrace? I mean, I've been in a few of these locker rooms.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
And yet the league does take advantage of its athletes. And in fact, the biggest league that takes the most advantage of its athletes is the game of football.
Yeah,
it just is, guys. Look, if you've read up on how damaging football can be to you later in life, and the development of these proteins in your brain, the CTE, that can impact your life to the point where you're not the same person you were 30 years ago when you were playing the game. And the fact that now you got me going on sports, the fact that there's non-guaranteed contracts in the National Football League, except when you are an exceptional athlete like Deshaun Watson, who is going to be able to play football this year at 6 games, right? They're at 17 now. He got an 11-game suspension for multiple poor conduct, bad decisions. It was a really awkward situation that he put himself in, and now he's paying for it. But people have to understand, he still has $45 million in guaranteed money because it was part of his bonus signing with the Browns.
For sure.
How big a punishment is that? Terrace, men behaving badly is not just related to sports, correct? It just gets magnified more by sports. You agree?
I agree. Just being in that spotlight, or being in those type of shoes definitely gets magnified. Josh, you brought up something about, cannabis in the NFL that made me start to think a lot. And just to say, so I would say this. So I think, the NFL as an institution, I think it has partnerships or ties to big pharma.
Oh, yes.
Which kind of connects opioids and other things, right? You not understand that. I don't have to go there.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the reasons why they've instituted independent concussion doctors now on the sidelines.
There you go. So, but on the flip side of that, I know cannabis. I love to use cannabis for adverse behavior. You know what I mean by adverse behavior?
No.
Explain it. Yeah.
So when I was an athlete, let's say anytime I was a receiver, anytime I ran a slant and I hurt my knee, anytime I went back to run that slant again, I'll be a little bit hesitant, right? A little bit worried in my head. But when I use it, we kind of throw that away, right? Forget about it. Now I can just go back to that 100% drill and run that slant. You understand what I mean by that correctly? So I think that's cool. I think that's good. I think it's good for the athletes. But on the flip side, you can't use every time stuff doesn't go your way, every time you have a bad game, every time you and the teammates are not on the same page. So, I see cannabis being good in the NFL, but if we don't use a regulation around it, especially for the young rookies that get in and just have the funds, just like we utilize with finance, with revenue, right? We teach them the class, et cetera. Same thing with cannabis on my end. And on top of that, when LeBron James gets a CBD deal, what do you think the little kids are going to say, Josh? Hey, Mom, I can use LeBron James does. They don't understand terpenes. They don't understand CBDN, CBDG, not yet. But they're going to say, Mom, LeBron James uses, or or Tom Brady uses. So I wonder how we're going to kind of, that's why I don't let it smoke you. I wonder how we're going to kind of, structure that out into a way that's kind of healthy for the league to use, for the athletes to use on a consistent basis, and how it's going to trickle into effect into the community and other places that are inspired sports.
Right. And you and I have talked about this. It's about education and enlightenment. And parenting is the toughest job any of us have ever had. It just is. Talk to any parent, they will say. And by the way, just because you have adult children does not mean you stop parenting. It's just a different chapter in the journey of life. Okay. And to me, educating the parents so that they can speak from experience and knowledge when they talk to their children about adult activities. And I'm talking about sex, drugs, and, well, it's not rock and roll, but it's certainly sex, drugs, and alcohol, right? And I'll put alcohol as a drug, okay? Because I think really and truly, a lot of people think alcohol is more closer to the poison than it is a plant medicine.
Yeah.
What's that?
And are we ever going to get to the point where we're not going to refer to the cannabis plant as a drug, but more as a medicine? And by the way, there were songs in the 60s by Jefferson Airplane about the drugs that mama will give you don't do nothing at all. That was the line in the song. Josh, I think you remember that song, don't you?
No.
Oh, man. God. All right. It's Jefferson Airplane's, Go
Yeah.
ask Alice. That's the name of the song. Anyway, the point is, it comes down to education. Karis, you and I have talked about this. You and I would love to go to parent-teacher organizations and events at night and talk to them and educate those groups about how best to talk to your kids about these awkward subjects for parents, right?
Absolutely.
So I don't know if you have any children. How would you bring up your children around this new environment of states that have legal cannabis, legal CBD, access to alcohol? And by the way, well, if you want to talk about it, I talked about it with the sociologist the other day. I really think that the drinking age has to come down to 18. It has to come down to 18 at the same time as those 18-year-olds have to give a year of service to their country. Because when corporal punishment was taken away from parenting because it's an assault, we figured out that timeouts don't work. Okay. It just doesn't work. Sure, there are consequences. Take away your phone, take away your computer, but those are communication devices. You don't want to do that for your kid. You need to enlighten and explain to your kid what this product does to a child's brain versus an adult's brain.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
And are we ever going to get there, Taris? I know that you spoke to one group.
Yeah.
Are other people in Washington State athletics searching you out to come talk to their teams now about the legalities of cannabis and don't let it smoke you, right? Don't let it consume you, right?
Absolutely. I've spoke to a few places, a few organizations out in Seattle. I would love to speak to more, especially high school, college level. But I think you have to be bold, right? For the first time, cannabis is growing hand in hand with humans, right? Another cannabinoid is coming out literally daily. And first time the will of people is over legislation, right? Everybody wants cannabis to be legal, but the will of people are like, it's legal, right? So I think you have to be bold is the first thing when you're talking to your kids, right? Second thing, I think I would say really research the companies who've been doing this for like 5 to 10 years, right? Not companies who's just starting now, who's just trying to jump on the bandwagon. Really the pioneers, the people who've seen this coming. Really check out what those companies doing, check out what they're saying about different cannabinoids, terpenes, et cetera. And then the last thing, whether you're 18 and just starting or whether you're 55 and just starting, I would say start low and go slow.
That's right.
The amount and go slow, right? So those would be my 3 points for sure, what I would tell someone, and hopefully that's helpful.
But more importantly, it's about reading books like yours, reading books like Steve D'Angelo's Cannabis Manifesto, reading books like Bruce Barkart's Weed the People. Those are the books that I now have consumed, and it has impacted my feelings about my use of the plant. And, I'm not a wake and baker, certainly not Monday through Friday anyway. I definitely have more of an on the clock, off the clock mentality. And it's because when I get off the clock, it's when my chronic pain starts to rear its ugly head into my brain again. So I need to balance those transmitters in my brain that are saying, holy crap, you can't walk because your right hip is bone on bone. Right? This is what goes through my mind. So is the moral of your story, too much of a good thing can be bad?
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. And to use it, learn to use it the right way, responsibly, starting low and going slow. And more importantly, ask your parents. Don't be afraid to talk about this, because at least now, the first thing, and Josh, I don't even know how old you are, but I was in the 60s and 70s, and always the first thing is you don't want to do that because it's against the law, right? That was the thing. You're going to get caught. You're going to go to jail. It's against the law. Okay, so you walk into the woods and you do it and nobody sees you and you get away with it because mom and dad told you not to do it. And as a child or a teenager, anything your parents are telling you not to do, like touch the hot stove when you're a kid, you're going to touch that hot stove to find out, what does that hot mean? What does this plant do? And I always bring up the Robitussin thing, because when I was a kid, Robitussin was the go-to cough medicine. Now you have to show your 21 ID because the kids, you can get buzzed off Robitussin. The kids are always going to find out the angles. We're always worried about them. Yeah, because we're keeping education from them. Why are there fewer alcoholics in Europe than they are in the United States? Josh, do you know the answer?
For the same reason that people in Amsterdam don't use cannabis, is once you take that away from them, they're not going to go after it for, they're always going to rubber band. They're going to do opposite of what you say and then fling towards what's wrong or bad or whatever. It's just the way that kids are.
It's the way kids are. So whenever I hear those comments, and by the way, do you know how many kids' lives have been saved or prolonged through cannabis medicinal practices? Mm-hmm. It's ask Mara Gordon about that, right? Aunt Zelda there. You can save your child's life by using cannabis if they have those certain things that we all recognize that the plant has impact on. And I'm talking about seizures, epilepsy. I'm talking about MS. I'm talking about Crohn's disease. These are all things that the research has shown that this plant can help.
Including longevity. We had Lofa Tatupu, a previous Seahawk player in the NFL, who said
Mosey's kid, as we like to call him here in the New England area, okay? Because his dad was a freaking legend, all right?
Him and I are the same age, and yet his athleticism is unreal. And he said that he would still be able to play if cannabis was legal. The CBD that he takes has increased his longevity and everything about him, ability to play with his kids, all the way to throwing a football, his torn pectoral muscle, everything is healed. And so I'm curious what your opinion is on the longevity of using cannabis in sports. If you think people would be playing longer and being older and just enjoying life more if it were allowed in sports arenas like the NFL.
Absolutely. It would make everything better. I think you would see less spontaneous acts on the field. Just being honest, I think you would see a whole culture shift around cannabis for sure. Even off the field situations that kind of go on, with certain things, with people getting in trouble, car accidents, all type of stuff. I think all that stuff was said.
We mentioned CETE. That Antonio Brown thing was really disturbing, and how people were just criticizing him taking his pads off and walking off the field. That wasn't the actions of a normal person. That was the actions of somebody who had been hit in the head one too many times. And there's videos where you can really probably figure out the exact person who hit him at the exact moment that created that CTE. But all of that aside, when you see folks like that, I think we need to be a lot more empathetic and maybe reach out and have them use cannabinoids like CBD or anything else for those ailments. It's really kind of an issue mentally and physically that I think if we normalize it, it will become allowed a lot sooner.
Right. Terrace, did you have a concussion?
I did not.
Wow. See, I got one in a car accident. It still impacts me 3 years later. So, this is, the brain is still a fascinating organ in all of us. And it can do a lot. It controls a lot of things, and that endocannabinoid system that balances those neurotransmitters in our brain. That's the sweet spot. That's the Garden of Eden for the plant, right? So anyway, hey, Terrace, how do people get your book? Because I know how to get it.
Yeah. So you can go on Amazon, type in "Don't Let It Smoke You." It should pop up. I would love for you to leave a review too. If you check it out, you like it, if it resonates with you, please leave a review. That's very helpful.
Where do you want me to review you? Because
Amazon.
On Amazon, yeah.
Amazon. I had a little issue with Amazon earlier today. Let's not go into that.
Okay.
That being said, I will write you a great review. Okay, I promise you that, because I couldn't put it down. Granted, it was a thin book. Okay, my kind of book, about 110 pages. All right, but I was able to identify with exactly how this substance played a role in your upbringing and where it is now.
For sure. And hopefully the book helps so others can kind of navigate that through their life and be able to move forward.
There you go. All right, Terrace Batista, it's great to talk with you live on this show. I look forward to chit-chatting with you more. Josh Kincaid, again, thank you for being there, and look forward to next week's show, because it's really going to be you and the scientists. So make sure you get plenty of textbook time on some of those chemistry books and genetics, because they're going to be talking about research and really and truly, and Terrace, I don't know how you feel about this. I joke about this. When I'm gone, I'm leaving my body to science with a list of all the things that I put in it and how often, and then they can study. They'll have some live tissue that they can study. Anyway, so Terrace Batista, thank you so much. Josh Kincaid, great. Dan French, our director. Isabel Turner, our production coordinator. For everybody here at Pro Cannabis Media, remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. And as Tara says, start low and go slow. See you later.